The day Michael found out about his grandfather's will was the day his life took an unexpected turn. He'd been working late at the office when he got the call from his mom, her voice still shaky with grief. "He left you the land, honey," she said. "All 5 acres off Highway 16. Michael nearly dropped his phone. That land had been in the family for as long as he could remember. As a kid, he'd spent summers there, running through tall grass, climbing the old oak tree that stood like a sentinel near the property line. His grandfather would follow behind, pointing out different plants and telling stories about the good old days. "Are you sure?" Michael asked, though he knew his mom wouldn't joke about something like this. "It's all there in black and white. Your grandfather was very clear about it." 3 weeks later, Michael stood at the edge of the property, the afternoon sun warm on his back. The land wasn't much to look at, mostly weeds and wild grass with a few trees scattered around. But it sat in a prime location, just off the highway exit where the town had been slowly expanding over the years. He kicked at a rock, sending it skittering across the ground. What was he supposed to do with 5 acres of land? His life was in the city, a good 2-hour drive away. He had a decent job at an accounting firm, a small apartment, and barely enough free time to keep his few houseplants alive, let alone maintain a property. His phone buzzed. It was a text from a real estate agent, the 3rd one this week. They were like vultures, somehow sensing fresh meat. The offers had started coming in just days after the funeral. $350,000 cash for the land. No hassle. "Call me." Michael sighed and put the phone back in his pocket. His grandfather's last words to him kept playing in his head, like a song he couldn't get rid of. It had been during his final days at the hospital. Michael had been sitting by the bed when his grandfather suddenly gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "That land," he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper, "don't sell it, no matter what they offer you. That land will be worth more than gold someday." Then he'd fallen back against the pillows, a small smile on his face, like he knew something Michael didn't. Now, standing here, Michael wondered what his grandfather had seen in this ordinary plot of land. To the west was a newer housing development called Oak Ridge Estates, rows of identical houses with perfectly trimmed lawns and strict rules about what color you could paint your mailbox. The wind picked up, rustling through the tall grass. A piece of paper tumbled across the ground and caught against Michael's shoe. He picked it up, a flyer for an Oak Ridge Estates HOA meeting. The sight of it reminded him of his one encounter with Barbara Winters, the HOA president. She'd stopped him once when he was visiting his grandfather, asking in a clipped voice if he had business in the neighborhood. When he explained who he was, her eyes had slid to the undeveloped land behind them, a strange look crossing her face. In the months after inheriting the land, Michael paid little attention to it. He drove out once a month or so to check that everything was okay, sometimes bringing lunch and sitting under the old oak tree. He'd gotten good at brushing off the increasingly aggressive real estate offers. His job kept him busy, and the promotion he'd been working toward was finally within reach. Life was comfortable, if a bit predictable. The land was just something he had in the background. A connection to his grandfather, a possible retirement project someday far in the future. But life has a funny way of shaking things up just when you think you've got everything figured out. What Michael didn't know was that Barbara Winters had been watching the property for years. She tried to convince his grandfather to sell many times, and each rejection had only strengthened her resolve. As president of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, she had big plans for expansion, and that 5-acre plot was the perfect location for what she called community improvements. She wasn't about to let some absentee landowner stand in her way. Not when she'd already put so much work into her plans. Not when she'd already made promises to certain people who didn't like to be disappointed. And definitely not when there were ways to get what she wanted without having to pay for it. It was a regular Tuesday when Michael's phone rang. He was in the middle of finalizing a report for his biggest client and nearly ignored the call. But something made him glance at the screen. It was Tom, his childhood buddy who still lived in his hometown. "Hey man, what's up?" Michael answered, wedging the phone between his ear and shoulder as he continued typing. "Dude, you need to get down here," Tom said, his voice tense. "Like today if possible." Michael stopped typing. "What's going on?" "It's your grandfather's land. There's stuff happening on it. Big machinery. People in hard hats. They're tearing up the ground. Michael's stomach dropped. What? That can't be right. I'm looking at it right now, Tom insisted. I was driving by and saw all this activity. At first, I thought maybe you decided to develop it or something, but then I remembered what you told me about keeping it as is. Michael was already closing his laptop, mind racing. I'll be there in 2 hours. Can you keep an eye on things until then? The drive felt endless. Michael called his boss on the way, making up a family emergency. Not entirely a lie, he thought grimly. When he finally pulled up to his property, the sight before him made his jaw drop. The land was unrecognizable. Where there had once been wild grass and scattered trees, there was now flattened dirt. The old oak tree had been cut down, just a sad stump remaining. Heavy equipment, bulldozers, backhoes, and cement trucks dotted the landscape. Men in construction gear moved about with purpose, and in the center of it all was a large flat area where concrete was being poured for what looked like a foundation. Michael parked haphazardly and jumped out of his car. Tom was waiting for him by the roadside, face grim. What in the world is happening? Michael demanded, more to himself than to Tom. They've been at it since early morning, Tom said. I asked one of the guys what they were building. He said it's going to be a gas station. A gas station? On my land? Michael's voice cracked with disbelief. As they stood there, a sleek black SUV pulled up, and out stepped Barbara Winters. She was dressed immaculately in a tailored pantsuit, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. She carried a clipboard and walked with the confident stride of someone who was exactly where they were supposed to be. Michael marched toward her, anchor building with each step. Ms. Winters, what's going on here? She turned, her expression shifting from surprise to a practiced smile. And hello there, Michael, isn't it? How nice to see you again. What are you doing on my property? He demanded. Barbara raised an eyebrow. Your property? I think there's been a misunderstanding. She flipped through some papers on her clipboard. This land is part of the Oak Ridge Estates community expansion. The HOA approved the development 3 months ago. That's impossible. This land belongs to me. I inherited it from my grandfather. Well, according to our records and the county assessor's office, this parcel was incorporated into Oak Ridge Estates common areas last year. She showed him a document with official-looking stamps. We've been planning this community service station for quite some time. Michael's head spun. This is crazy. I have the deed. I pay taxes on this land. Barbara's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. I suggest you check your paperwork again. Everything here is above board and approved by the county. We've already invested considerable resources in this project. Just then, a man in a business suit approached. Ms. Winters, we need your signature on the updated agreement with Superfuel Corporation. Of course, she replied smoothly, then turned back to Michael. If you'll excuse me, Judy calls. Feel free to contact our HOA office if you have any questions. She handed him a business card and walked away, heels clicking on the newly poured concrete. Michael stood there, papers clutched in his hand, watching as strangers continued to build on the land his grandfather had treasured. Tom put a hand on his shoulder. What are you going to do? He asked quietly. Michael took a deep breath. I'm going to figure out what's really going on here. Because there's no way, this is legal. As he walked back to his car, he glanced back at Barbara, who was smiling and shaking hands with a group of men in expensive suits. Something about her confident posture told him this wasn't going to be an easy fight. Michael barely slept that night. He tossed and turned in the guest bedroom at Tom's house, his mind racing with images of bulldozers tearing up his grandfather's land. By morning, he had dark circles under his eyes and a determination that burned like fire in his chest. I need a lawyer, he told Tom over coffee. Know any good ones around here? Tom thought for a moment. Actually, my cousin Patty became an attorney a few years back. She specializes in property law. Want me to give her a call? 3 hours later, Michael sat in a small office downtown, watching his party flip through the folder of documents he brought, the deed to the land, tax statements, his grandfather's will, and photos he'd taken of the construction site. This doesn't add up, Patty said, frowning at Barbara's paperwork that Michael had been given. These documents claim your grandfather sold the land to Oak Ridge Estates last year. She looked up at Michael. But you said he passed away 6 months ago. Exactly, Michael nodded. and he was in the hospital for weeks before that. No way he was signing property deals. Patty pulled out her phone and made a quick call. "Hey Joe, it's Patty. Can you pull up any records of a land sale for the old Johnson property off Highway 16? Last year sometime." She waited, then raised her eyebrows at whatever she heard. "Interesting. Thanks." She hung up and leaned forward. "My friend works at the county records office. There is a sale on file, but he says the paperwork looks rushed. The signature doesn't match other documents your grandfather filed over the years." Michael's stomach clenched. "Aren't you saying what I think you're saying?" "I think someone forged your grandfather's signature," Patty said bluntly. "And I'm guessing that someone is Barbara Winters." Over the next week, Michael and Patty dug deeper. They discovered Barbara had connections throughout the local government. Her brother-in-law worked in the permits office. Her college roommate was on the city council. Every step of the way, the gas station project had been fast-tracked with minimal oversight. "She got the permits approved in record time," Patty said, showing Michael a stack of paperwork. "And look at this, she's already signed a 20-year lease agreement with Superfuel Corporation. They're paying the HOA $15,000 a month for the first 5 years, with increases after that." Michael whistled. "That's over $1 million. No wonder she was so determined." "It gets worse," Patty continued. "The construction company got a huge deposit upfront. They've already spent most of it on materials and labor. They took their evidence to the county sheriff's office, but the response was lukewarm at best." "These are serious allegations against a respected community leader," the deputy said, barely glancing at their paperwork. "We'll look into it, but honestly, this seems like a civil matter, not criminal." As they left the sheriff's office, Michael kicked at a rock in the parking lot. "So that's it. She gets away with stealing my land." "Not necessarily," Patty replied. "We can file an injunction to stop construction while we fight this in court." But when they tried to file the paperwork, they hit another roadblock. The judge who would need to sign off on it was out of town for 2 weeks. By then, the gas station would be well underway. Desperate, Michael decided to confront Barbara directly. He found her at the HOA office, a small but fancy building with a polished reception desk and framed photos of Oak Ridge Estates on the walls. "I know what you did," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I know you forged my grandfather's signature." Barbara didn't even flinch. She leaned back in her chair, perfectly manicured fingers tapping on her desk. "That's quite an accusation. Do you have proof that would stand up in court?" "My lawyer and I have been gathering evidence all week." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Evidence takes time to process. Construction doesn't wait. By the time you get a court date, that gas station will be up and running." She stood up and straightened her jacket. "Look, Michael, you're out of your league here, even if. And that's a big if. You could prove anything. Do you have any idea how much it would cost to fight the HOA? We have a legal fund specifically for situations like this." Her threat was clear. She would drain him financially before letting him win. As Michael turned to leave, defeated, Barbara called after him. "By the way, the oak tree that was cut down. The wood's being used to build a nice bench for our community park. We're going to put a plaque on it dedicated to your grandfather. Isn't that thoughtful?" Michael walked out, hands clenched into fists, wondering how someone could be so cruel and what he was going to do next. That night, Michael couldn't sleep again. He sat on Tom's porch, nursing a cold beer, watching the stars disappear behind clouds. The weight of the situation pressed down on him like a physical thing. "You look like you're about to explode," Tom said, joining him with his own drink. "I just can't believe she's going to get away with this," Michael replied. "My grandfather loved that land. He trusted me to take care of it." He took a long swig from his bottle. "And now there's going to be a gas station there, selling overpriced coffee and lottery tickets." Tom was quiet for a moment. "You know, my dad always said there's more than one way to skin a cat." Michael looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Well, you're thinking about this as a battle. Either you win and tear down the gas station, or Barbara wins and it stays. But maybe there's a third option." The idea took root in Michael's mind as he tossed and turned that night. By morning, it had grown into something that made him sit up straight in bed. "I need to see the lease agreement again," he told Patty when he burst into her office the next day. She raised an eyebrow but pulled out the file. "What are you looking for?" The actual parties involved, Michael said, flipping through pages. Here, look. The lease isn't between Superfuel and the HOA. It's between Superfuel and whoever owns the land. Patty's eyes widened as she caught on. And since the land transfer was fraudulent, I'm still the legal owner, Michael finished. Which means that lease should be with me, not the HOA. They spent the next 2 days gathering every piece of evidence they could find. Property records, bank statements, even handwriting samples from old Christmas cards his grandfather had sent, showing how different his real signature was from the forgery. On Thursday morning, instead of going to Barbara's office or the sheriff, Michael and Patty walked into the regional headquarters of Superfuel Corporation. The receptionist looked up, surprised to see them without an appointment. "Can I help you?" "We need to speak with whoever is in charge of the new Oak Ridge Estates location," Michael said confidently. "It's extremely urgent." 20 minutes later, they sat across from Greg Chen, Superfuel's Regional Development Director. He was a serious man with glasses and a cautious expression. "Mr. Chen," Michael began, "I'm sorry to drop in like this, but your company is about to make a very expensive mistake." For the next half hour, Michael and Patty laid out everything: the forged documents, the rushed permits, and most importantly, proof that Michael was the rightful owner of the land. "So you see," Patty concluded, "the lease agreement Superfuel signed is with a party who doesn't actually own the land. Legally, it's worthless." Greg's face had grown increasingly troubled as they spoke. He picked up his phone. "Denise, cancel my next meeting and get legal down here right now." 3 hours and many phone calls later, Michael sat back in his chair, mentally exhausted but somewhat satisfied. Superfuel's lawyers had verified everything. The land was indeed still legally his, despite Barbara's paperwork. "This puts us in a difficult position," Greg said, rubbing his temples. "We've already invested over $300,000 in construction." "I understand that," Michael replied, an idea forming. "And I'm not looking to hurt your company. You were missiled, just like I was." Greg looked up, hopeful. "What are you suggesting?" "The location is still good for a gas station," Michael said slowly. "Highway access, growing community nearby. The only problem is who you're doing business with." Patty shot him a surprised look, but Michael continued. "What if, instead of dealing with Barbara and her HOA, you deal directly with me? I am the legal owner after all." Greg leaned forward. "Are you offering to honor the lease agreement?" "Not the existing one," Michael shook his head. "We'd need a new agreement, one that's fair to both of us." As he drove back to Tom's house that evening, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in days: hope. The meeting had ended with Superfuel agreeing to consider his proposal. Their lawyers would draft something for everyone to review. Tom was waiting on the porch. "How'd it go?" Michael smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. "I think I just figured out what my grandfather meant when he said the land would be worth more than gold someday." That night, as he drifted off to sleep, Michael remembered something else his grandfather used to say: "Sometimes the best way to solve a problem isn't to fight it, it's to find a way to make it work for you instead." 3 days later, Michael sat in a conference room at Superfuel's regional office. Spread out before him were papers covered in legal language that Patty had explained to him the night before. His hands were sweaty as he picked up the pen. "Just to confirm once more," Greg said, "the new lease agreement is for 20 years, with an option to renew for another 10. You'll receive $18,000 monthly for the first 5 years, with a 3% increase every year after that." Michael nodded, still hardly believing this was happening. The amount was significantly higher than what Barbara had negotiated. Apparently, she'd been so eager to get the deal done that she'd accepted much less than market value. "And Superfuel acknowledges that they'll handle all communications with the HOA regarding the change in leaseholders," Patty added, making sure every detail was clear. "Correct," Greg confirmed. "Our legal team is prepared for any resistance." The slight smile on his face suggested he knew exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. Michael signed his name on the dotted line, and just like that, he became the landlord of a gas station that was still under construction. When they walked out of the building, Patty gave him a high five. "You just turned a nightmare into a gold mine," she said, grinning. "Most of my clients would have just fought to tear everything down and probably gotten stuck in court for years." I guess I have my grandfather to thank, Michael replied. He always looked for opportunities where others saw problems. The next morning brought exactly the storm they had expected. Michael's phone rang at 7:15 a.m., Barbara's name flashing on the screen. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded when he answered, her voice so shrill he had to hold the phone away from his ear. "I just got a call from Superfuel saying they're canceling their agreement with the HOA." "Actually, they're not canceling anything," Michael said calmly. "They're just making sure they're doing business with the actual property owner. You know, the legal thing to do." "This is outrageous," Barbara sputtered. "We've invested time and resources into this project. The HOA board will sue you for every penny you have." "With what evidence?" Michael asked. "The forged deed that has my grandfather's fake signature on it. The rushed permits that your brother-in-law pushed through. I don't think you want this to go to court, Barbara." The silence on the other end told him he'd hit home. "You can't just," she started, but her voice had lost its commanding edge. "I can and I have," Michael cut in. "But I'm not unreasonable. Construction will continue as planned. The community will get its gas station. The only difference is who collects the rent." After a moment of tense silence, Barbara's tone changed completely. "Perhaps we can work something out," she said, suddenly all business. "The HOA could buy the land from you, for a fair price, of course." Michael almost laughed. "I'm not interested in selling. My grandfather wanted me to keep the land, and that's exactly what I'm doing." "You'll regret this," Barbara said, her voice cold. "Nobody crosses me in my own community." "Funny, I was about to say the same thing about my property," Michael replied before hanging up. Later that afternoon, Michael stood watching the construction crews who were back at work. The Superfuel team had briefly paused operations while the legal details were sorted out, but now things were moving forward again. Tom joined him, handing him a cold soda. "So what happened with the HOA Dragon Lady?" "She threatened me, then tried to buy me out, then threatened me again," Michael shrugged. "Pretty much what you'd expect." "You think she'll try something else?" Tom asked. "Probably. But I've got something she doesn't." "What's that?" "The law on my side," Michael said, "plus a copy of every document she forged. If she pushes this, she's not just looking at losing her position with the HOA, she could face criminal charges." As they watched, a truck arrived carrying the large Superfuel sign that would eventually tower over the station. The workers began unloading it carefully. "You know what's ironic?" Michael said. "If she had just approached me honestly in the beginning, offered to buy the land or even lease it properly, I might have said yes. All this trouble because she thought she could take a shortcut." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "Some people learn the hard way that shortcuts often end up being the longest route." That evening, Michael got an unexpected email from the HOA board, minus Barbara. They were requesting a meeting to discuss recent developments and ensure community relations remain positive. The tide was turning. 6 weeks later, Michael stood at the edge of his property, watching as workers put the finishing touches on the gas station. The Superfuel sign stood tall and bright, visible from the highway exit. The concrete was smooth, the pumps gleaming in the morning sun. It was nothing like the wild, natural land his grandfather had loved, but Michael was starting to see it with new eyes. "Looks like they're almost done," Tom said, joining him with 2 cups of coffee from the drive-thru down the road. "Grand opening is next Friday," Michael replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Greg says they're expecting a big turnout." The meeting with the HOA board had gone surprisingly well. Without Barbara there to dominate the conversation, the other members had been reasonable, even apologetic. They claimed they hadn't known about the forged documents, though Michael had his doubts. Still, they were eager to distance themselves from the scandal. Barbara had been asked to resign, effective immediately. "Have you heard anything from her?" Tom asked, as if reading Michael's thoughts. "Not a word. Patty said she put her house up for sale last week. Guess she's skipping town before things get worse." Michael had decided not to press charges. The truth was, he didn't have the energy for a long legal battle, and he was already getting what he wanted: control of his land and a steady income from the lease. As they sipped their coffee, Greg pulled up in his company car and walked over to them. "Morning, gentlemen," he called out. "Just doing a final inspection before next week's opening." "Everything looking good?" Michael asked. "Better than good," Greg replied. This is going to be one of our flagship locations. The traffic studies show this highway exit gets about 50% more vehicles than we initially thought. That gave Michael an idea. You know, I've been thinking about that unused space at the back of the station. The office area, Greg asked. Yeah, the lease says I can use it or sublease it if I want. I was thinking it might make a good spot for a small coffee shop. Something to compete with that place down the road. He gestured with his cup. Greg considered this. That could work. More reasons for people to stop here. Exactly. And I was looking at the side lot too. There's room for electric vehicle charging stations. Those are going to be big in the next few years. You've done your homework, Greg said, looking impressed. Superfuel has been rolling out EV stations at select locations. I could talk to the higher-ups about adding this site to the list. Michael nodded. I'd appreciate that. And maybe we could work out a profit-sharing deal for those. As Greg walked away to continue his inspection, Tom looked at Michael with raised eyebrows. Charging stations? Coffee shop? When did you become a business mogul? Michael laughed. Just thinking ahead. The gas station is great, but why stop there? This location has potential. Over the next few days, Michael threw himself into research. He looked up information about commercial subletting, profit margins on coffee shops, and the growing market for electric vehicles. He even contacted a few local coffee shops to see if any would be interested in opening a second location. The owner of Been There, Done That, a popular coffee shop downtown, was immediately interested. We've been wanting to expand, she told Michael over the phone. A spot right by the highway would be perfect. By the time the gas station's grand opening arrived, Michael had sketched out plans for what he was starting to think of as a mini business complex. The gas station would be just the beginning. The opening day was busy, with a steady stream of cars pulling in to check out the new station. Michael stood off to the side, watching people fill their tanks and head into the convenience store for snacks and drinks. A woman with 2 kids walked out of the store and noticed Michael. Are you the owner? She asked, juggling her purchases and her children. Sort of, Michael replied. I own the land. Well, it's really nice to have a gas station here. We live in Oak Ridge Estates, and it's so convenient having this close by. Michael smiled. I'm glad it's working out for the community. As she walked away, Michael felt a strange sense of satisfaction. His grandfather had been right about the land being valuable, just not in the way either of them had expected. Instead of fighting progress, he had found a way to shape it on his own terms. That night, he sat down with a notepad and started writing down more ideas. Maybe a small shipping store or a quick service restaurant. The possibilities seemed endless. 3 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. On a crisp fall morning, Michael pulled his car into the parking lot of what locals now called Johnson Plaza, named after his grandfather. He parked near the coffee shop and took a moment to admire how much had changed. Where once there had been just wild grass and trees, now stood a thriving little business center. The Superfuel gas station anchored one end, its sign rising high above everything else. Next to it was Been There, Done That coffee shop, which had become so popular they'd expanded twice, adding outdoor seating under bright blue umbrellas. On the other side was a small sandwich place called Breadwinners, and beside that, a pack and ship store that had saved many Oak Ridge Estates residents countless trips to the post office in town. And at the back of the property, gleaming in the morning sun, stood a row of electric vehicle charging stations, always busy with cars getting their batteries topped up while their owners grabbed coffee or lunch. Michael climbed out of his car and waved to Darrell, the gas station manager, who was adjusting the price numbers on the big sign. Morning, boss, Darrell called out. Big day today, huh? Sure is, Michael replied with a smile. He didn't bother correcting Darrell about the boss thing anymore. Technically, Michael wasn't anyone's employer, he was just the landlord. But over time, he'd become involved with all the businesses on his property, offering suggestions, helping solve problems, and becoming something of a friendly face that tied everything together. Michael headed into the coffee shop, where the owner greeted him with a hug. The new espresso machine is a game changer, she told him excitedly. Lines are moving twice as fast now. Michael nodded, genuinely pleased. That's great to hear. How are the morning rushes going? Crazy busy, but in a good way, she replied, handing him his usual order without him having to ask. We're thinking of opening even earlier to catch more of the commuter crowd." After chatting a few more minutes, Michael took his coffee and headed to the small office he built at the corner of the property. It wasn't much, just a simple room with a desk, some filing cabinets, and a view of the entire plaza. But it was where he handled the business of being a landlord. As he settled in behind his desk, he couldn't help but think about how much his life had changed. 3 years ago, he'd been stuck in a cubicle at an accounting firm, crunching numbers for other people's businesses. Now he was his own boss, managing a property that generated more income each month than he used to make in half a year. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Hello, Mr. Johnson. This is Pete Wilson from Wilson Development. I was wondering if you had considered my offer on the land across the street." Michael glanced out his window at the vacant lot opposite his property. He'd purchased it 2 years ago when it came up for sale, sensing that as traffic to his businesses increased, that land would become valuable too. "I've thought about it," Michael replied, "but I'm not interested in selling right now." "I could go up another 50,000, the developer pressed. "It's not about the money," Michael said. "I've got plans for that property." After ending the call, Michael pulled out his notebook where he'd been sketching ideas. A small medical center, maybe, or a daycare for commuters, something that would complement what he already had, not compete with it. A knock at the door made him look up. Tom stood there grinning. "Ready for lunch? The sandwich place has a new menu." As they walked across the plaza, Tom shook his head. "Man, every time I come here, I can't believe how different it looks. Your grandfather would be proud." "You think so?" Michael asked. "Are you kidding? You turned a piece of empty land into all this." Tom gestured around them. "Plus, you gave that HOA lady what she deserved." Michael laughed. "I heard she moved to Florida." "Good riddance," Tom said. "By the way, did you hear the Oak Ridge Estates HOA is completely different now? They even invited you to be an honorary member." "No thanks," Michael chuckled. "I've had enough of HOAs to last a lifetime." As they sat down to eat, Michael watched people coming and going, filling up their tanks, grabbing coffee, picking up packages. His grandfather had been right about the land being valuable, just not in the way either of them had expected. Sometimes life throws you curveballs, Michael thought. The trick is learning how to hit them out of the park.